He walked into the boardroom wearing a quiet confidence. Dressed sharp but simple, just another black man, they thought. A few glanced up, barely nodding. Some didn't bother to look. To them, he was probably the intern, or maybe the guy setting up the projector. But within minutes, that assumption would backfire in a way none of them saw coming. The meeting was already running behind schedule. A few executives whispered, annoyed he hadn't been shown to the right room. One even asked him if he was lost. He smiled, didn't say much, and calmly took a seat at the head of the table. That's when the energy shifted, but not in the way you'd expect. Phones stopped buzzing. Jaws tightened. No one said a word, but you could feel the discomfort rising, because he wasn't lost. He was the guest speaker, the man who'd been flown in last minute to salvage a deal falling apart. A deal none of them had managed to close in 6 months. What happened in the next 5 minutes would leave the entire room speechless. And by the time he was done talking, not only had he flipped their assumptions, but he'd flipped the entire direction of the company. They thought they knew who he was, but they had no idea what was coming. So what exactly did he say in those 5 minutes? And why did one of the senior execs walk out red-faced and shaken? Stick around because this story's just getting started. His name was Elijah Carter. Not that anyone in that room had bothered to check the itinerary. The company had hired him through a partner firm after months of struggling to lock in a deal with a global client. Elijah wasn't loud, he didn't brag, but his record spoke for itself. He'd turned around 3 failing mergers in just 1 year. Still, none of that mattered when he stepped into that room. What they saw first was his skin, not his skills. While the executives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, Elijah quietly opened his tablet, scanning the deal documents with calm focus. You could feel the tension thick in the air. One director leaned over and whispered to another, "Are we sure this is the guy?" Elijah heard it. Didn't flinch behind his calm expression, though Elijah had clocked everything. The dismissive glances, the fake smiles, the questions that weren't really questions. It wasn't new to him. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, he learned early how to navigate rooms where he wasn't expected to belong. He had degrees, yes, but more than that, he had lived experience. And today, that was his edge. He let them underestimate him, just long enough, because once he started talking, things would shift fast. But before that, he needed to expose the blind spot, their blind spot, not just about him, but about why the deal was failing in the first place. They didn't see it coming, but they were about to. Elijah finally stood up, slowly and without a single note in hand. "Let's talk about why this deal isn't working," he said, calmly scanning the room. A few of the executives exchanged glances, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. Most expected a technical breakdown or financial analysis. Instead, Elijah started by asking a question no one had dared to ask. "Have any of you actually spoken to the client's team in their own language on their terms?" The room fell silent. He walked to the screen and pulled up a simple slide. No numbers, just a timeline, showing every meeting, every pitch, and every email. "You've been selling a solution." But not once did anyone ask what they really need. He pointed out cultural mistakes, translation issues, and toned-off marketing materials. You didn't lose their trust because the product is bad. You lost it because they don't feel seen. That hit hard. One exec tried to interject. "We followed protocol." Elijah cut him off, politely but firmly. "And protocol is exactly why you're losing them. You're trying to close a human relationship like it's a transaction." While he spoke, a younger team member, Jade, a marketing analyst, sat straighter in her chair. She had flagged these same issues months ago and was shut down. Now she watched Elijah speak with clarity and control, and something in her shifted. Maybe this was her chance to be heard too. But just as Elijah was building momentum, someone at the far end of the table suddenly stood up. It was the company's vice president. And the look on his face said this wasn't going to stay professional for long. The vice president, Richard Langston, slowly stepped forward, his jaw tight, his voice low but sharp. "We didn't bring you here to lecture us on cultural nuance. We brought you here to save a deal." His words hung heavy in the room, a mix of challenge and warning. Some nodded in quiet agreement, others looked down, unsure where this was headed. Elijah didn't blink. "I am saving it," Elijah said, steady. "You just don't like the way I'm doing it." Richard chuckled under his breath, then turned to the others. "We've had 3 consultants already. All of them said the same thing: pricing, timeline, product fit. You're telling us the problem is feelings." Elijah didn't flinch. "I'm telling you the problem is people. People don't buy what you sell. They buy how you treat them." The room was tense. Even the hum of the AC felt louder. Jade leaned forward, sensing the storm building. She knew Richard, knew he didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of the full team. Elijah could feel the pressure shift. He was either about to flip the narrative or get pushed out of the room. But this was familiar ground. His entire career had been about walking into rooms where people didn't expect much from him, and turning that into his advantage. He clicked to the next slide. "You want results? Here's what your competitors are doing differently. Here's why they're winning." But before he could continue, Richard slammed the remote out of Elijah's hand. Gasps filled the room, and for a moment, no one moved. The remote clattered to the floor, and the silence that followed was deafening. Richard's outburst had crossed a line, but no one moved to stop him. Most just stared, frozen, some in shock, others in quiet agreement. Elijah stood still, calm, even as the tension rose like smoke in the room. Then, without warning, Jade stood up. I emailed that same research 6 weeks ago, she said, voice shaking but strong. I said the client felt unheard. I said the tone of our messaging was off, and I was told to stay in my lane. All eyes turned. No one expected her to speak up, not in front of Richard, especially not with that much honesty. But she was tired. Tired of being silenced. And in Elijah, she saw someone who was finally saying what needed to be said. Richard turned to her, jaw tightening. This isn't the time. No. She cut in. This is the time. You're blaming him for saying what we've all been afraid to. Suddenly, others in the room started shifting. A designer nodded slightly. A junior account manager pulled up the presentation on his own screen. Quietly, the power dynamic was shifting, and Richard saw it. That's when the second twist dropped. The door opened, a voice echoed from the hallway. Is this a bad time? It was the CEO, early, unexpected, and standing beside her was the client's regional director, the very person Elijah had been talking about. They had heard everything, and now the real stakes were on the table. The room stood still as the CEO walked in, her heels echoing against the tile, eyes scanning every face before landing on Elijah. I came early because I wanted to see how this was handled, she said. Then she looked at Richard. And clearly, I made the right call. Richard's face flushed. He stepped back, stammering something under his breath, but the CEO raised a hand. Enough. Her tone was final. The client's regional director, Miss Dow, walked in behind her, his expression unreadable. He nodded politely to the team, then turned to Elijah. Everything you said in those 5 minutes, that's exactly why we almost walked away. Murmurs rippled across the table. Elijah didn't smile. He just nodded, calm and grounded. Mr. Dow continued, we weren't looking for a better offer. We were looking for someone who actually understood us. He did. The CEO turned back to the team. I brought Elijah in because I knew this deal was about more than numbers. We've been blind to the human side of this business for too long. Then came the twist. She placed a folder on the table, sliding it across to Richard. Effective immediately. Elijah will be leading this project and reporting directly to me. You're stepping back? Richard's hands stiffened, lips pressed tight. No shouting now. Just the slow realization that the room he once controlled had moved on without him. As Elijah gathered his things, he paused and looked around the room, not with arrogance, but quiet strength. He was never just another black man. He was the shift they didn't see coming. The meeting ended in a very different tone than it started. Elijah didn't linger. He packed up his tablet, nodded to Jade, and gave a respectful nod to the CEO before quietly leaving the room. But the impact he made stayed behind like a pulse. People didn't rush out. Instead, they sat still, processing. For the first time in months, it felt like the company was finally breathing again. Jade walked out a few minutes later and caught up to Elijah in the hallway. Thank you, she said, genuinely. Not just for speaking up, but for making space for the rest of us too. Elijah smiled. Sometimes change doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from saying the right thing at the right time, and meaning it. Back in the boardroom, the CEO met with the rest of the team. She announced that moving forward, all major projects would include cross-functional voices from interns to senior leaders, and that unconscious bias training would no longer be optional. Richard didn't say much. He stepped down quietly, realizing too late that leadership isn't about control, it's about